Leif, tell me, have you noticed a shift in attitude towards religion online?
I have. I feel like a lot of people who were initially skeptical or angry towards religious people, even atheist commentators, some of them have gotten a lot less angry.
Angry? You would say that?
Yep.
Yeah, I've kind of noticed that as well. I feel like a lot of the louder voices, I mean, I'm sure it's still there. Like, I feel like a lot of the louder voices are a lot more calm now.
Yep.
Like, Alex O'Connor is he's a calm guy.
Yep.
You know? And it's like, I mean, sure, you'll still get bashed in like comment sections and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like the age of like the edgy atheist is kind of like
Dying down.
over. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, hello, audience.
I'm Leif,
And I'm Micah.
and we are the hosts of Faith Isn't Blind. It's a podcast that explores the core of Christianity in a way that may help young people like us feel more confident in our faith. We are here to help answer the questions of those who want to understand what they believe and why.
Yep.
And we're going to start with a short story that was featured in an article on Spectrum Magazine, which is an Adventist publication. And the article went over several stories of people who, over time, usually as young people, left the Adventist church. And the first story featured was a story of a man named Grant Warham. And he started out, as many of us have, I'm sure we could relate to this, in the Adventist bubble, going to Adventist schools, Adventist church, very comfortable in his faith. He said he had a loving family, not a lot of questions. But that all changed when he went to a secular school.
Secular schools.
I know. And he went to the secular school, and instead of only attending church on Saturdays, he also started going to church on Sundays. And this is a quote from the article that explains what happened after that. I found myself rolling my eyes at most of what I was doing and seeing on Saturdays and enjoying more what I was seeing on Sundays. In this fresh environment, he began to hear ideas that changed the worldview that had insulated him for so long. If I heard something I thought I disagreed with, I needed to be able to quantify to myself why I disagreed with it without mental gymnastics, or I had to change my opinion. Suddenly, I couldn't justify to myself why I believed what I believed. It wasn't until Wareham's sophomore year in college that he thought to himself that perhaps the earth is more than 6,000 years old, or maybe other denominations offered good things too. I think that this story, it's specific to him, but it could relate to a lot of other people's experiences as well. And I think that it could really tell us a lot about why people end up leaving the church.
Yeah, I mean, you can sort of read between the lines, not even read between the lines, just like see what he says. And he's talking about like losing, not being really prepared for challenges to his faith or like opposing worldviews.
Right.
Because the worldview he had wasn't built on a very strong foundation of reason.
And he wasn't really used to challenging it because he grew up in such a sheltered environment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not necessarily bad, but it could lead to bad things when you're never faced with other ideas.
Yeah, and especially when you don't know why, your own ideas are the way that they are.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that, I think, is just from the church.
Right.
So Sabbath school, I feel like there's a lot of emphasis on like games, and that builds a community, and that's good and has a place.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot less like strong
Substance.
Teaching and like a lot less substance. I feel like.
I do think that it's good teaching, like a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus loves you.
It's all
you're
true.
saved by grace, stuff like that. It's very important. But I think part of the problem is that a lot of the basics are taken for granted by Sabbath school teachers and other people, part of the Adventist bubble. They just assume that because you were raised in an environment where we believe in God, where we believe in the divinity of Christ, where we read the Bible, where we know these Bible stories, it automatically means that we accept them as true. And there's evidence to support that, but I don't think many people are taught the evidence. They're just taught the gospel and
like,
the higher level.
Well, yeah, like the extra stuff.
Right.
Like, you know,
Right.
you'll start straight on sanctification, you forget about salvation, you just sort of skip that bit.
Mm-hmm.
There's also been a lot of times where, you know, you just won't be pressured to go very deep into concepts. I remember several times when I've been in Sabbath school or like in like a private worship, and, you know, you told not, let's not get too theological or theoretical here. And, you know, there are times when practical application is good, but any practical application has to extend from a true theoretical position.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the church's wholesale ignorance, or just, you know, maybe not focusing on more the theoretical, the philosophical, the apologetical
Right.
aspects of the faith can sort of lead to stuff like that. That story of the guy leaving the church, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
And I think that we're talking about this in the Adventist sense, but this is definitely not a new
oh yeah,
phenomena.
this is all of like modern Western Christianity is definitely
Yeah.
struggling from this sort of like anti-intellectual
Right.
thing. In fact, there was a 1980 Gallup poll on religion, and it said, "We are having a revival." This is a quote: "We are having a revival of feelings, but not one of the knowledge of God. The church today is more guided by feelings than convictions. We value enthusiasm more than informed commitment." And I feel like in the sermons I see, and just like the way I hear people express their Christianity, that's definitely true.
Right.
Yeah.
And I see that in school as well. A lot of altar calls. Once again, none of the things we're talking about are bad, but I think that they're often overused and overemphasized. Altar calls after so many chapels, really capitalizing on people feeling emotional or even
Yeah.
guilty about their faith in a way.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean.
And then,
you know, like,
like-
oh, I don't believe enough.
right, and thinking that if you do this thing in chapel or in church, and maybe for a few days you pray a lot more, then that's really going to help your faith a lot, and it helps. But it's not really getting to the core of the issue, I think.
Yeah, it's like an emotional Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have someone or you're preaching to someone who's not feeling these emotions, they'll either feel like super guilty, like, you know, am I not a Christian? Because we're emphasizing this emotional aspect of the faith, which, you
Right.
know, again, it's not bad to be
Mhm.
emotionally close to God. That's a very good thing. But if you remove, but it's not like the basis of the faith.
Yeah,
You know, feelings are terrible masters, but great servants.
Yeah.
The other way around, but, you know. And so I feel like I do see that a lot, though.
yeah. And
Like-
from an inside perspective, like someone who's already in the Adventist church, that's not always great because you're missing the basics. And also from an outside perspective, if you're just being introduced to the church and you go to a service or you go to a school where it's all focused on the emotions and all focused on, you know, this somewhat shallow type of faith, that's also not going to leave a good impression on you because
Yes.
you'll view it as hysterical.
Well, yeah, and it's like, well, you know, and this is the prevailing opinion of the culture that's like, well, that's all good and well for you, but I don't really have to care about this. It's
Right.
not like true.
Yeah, because you're never given arguments for why it is.
Yeah. The gospel nowadays is like appealing to like felt needs and emotions, right? Like
Yeah.
it feels right. You remember the song? I don't remember the song, but "You ask me how I know he lives within my heart."
Yeah,
It's like, you ask me how I know he lives. Here's
I think so.
500 documents of
Yeah.
historical evidence. Right?
Yeah.
He lives
Doesn't
within
make
my
as
heart.
nice of a song to
But
say
yeah, it
500
doesn't.
documents,
Yeah,
but
it's not quite as catchy.
yeah. So what do you think that people should be doing to personally fight against that? Because the church, I think there's things that the church could do, but obviously that's a whole different discussion. What could someone do to address their own issues if they're part of this situation?
Well, I think it's about developing a Christian mind. So remember, Jesus says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength," right?
Mm-hmm.
Or whatever the order is.
Right.
And a big part of that, along with theological understanding. So that's what you believe. You know, a lot of people have very shallow conceptions of things like the Trinity, the atonement, soteriology, how are we saved.
Mhm.
They only kind of like vaguely know that stuff. But to really know it and to get down into the weeds.
Yeah.
And the second thing I think is super important is apologetics. This is like the why you believe.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people are skeptical of apologetics. I think they confuse like maybe a childlike faith for childlike thinking, or that, if you have apologetics, you destroy room for faith. And I think that is just based on a misconception of what faith is. Because faith is more of trusting what you actually believe,
Right.
And what you believe, you should have reason for believing it.
Yeah. I remember I was reading The Mere Christianity, the one that you suggested
Yeah,
a few weeks
C.S.
ago, and he said something about faith. It was not that faith is believing without knowing or without seeing. It's trusting what you do know and what you do see and believe, regardless of passing moods or passing doubts. Like a time when you might be doubting what's going on in your life, you still have your faith because it's something that's solid that you can hold on to. It's not just going through life without something to back you up.
I mean, yeah, even thinking about the words like faithfulness, you think about being like faithful to like your spouse or something. You don't think about like,
I don't know
just
why.
picking some
I don't know why I
random
care about
person
them,
on the
but
street.
yeah,
And then I have a blind faith that you're going to be my perfect spouse. I'm going to marry you right now.
right.
It's, this person is like good for you and you've made a commitment to this person. And no matter what the passing mood is, you remain faithful to them.
Right.
It's more of like just living what you actually believe than just believing blindly.
Right.
Another problem with blind faith is that you're sort of pressed with a question, what blind faith do I have? What if a Muslim comes up to me and says, well, you should have faith in Islam?
Right.
And then you can't give any reasons why Christianity is better than Islam as a faith.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, which blind faith do I take? So you do have to have.
And also with that point that you made, what blind faith do I choose? When you have the option between blind faith, which some people view religion as, and not blind faith, which if someone who's an atheist confronts you with evidence for their beliefs and says, sure, you could have blind faith, but you could also have my faith, which is based on evidence, which one are you going to choose?
You're just going to pick the one you like more.
Yeah.
Probably. I mean, you might pick the one you think is true.
Yeah.
But most people, they'll just pick the one they think is prettier or like conducive to
more
the life
compelling
that
to
they
them
want
in
to
the
live.
moment. Yeah.
Right. So the other thing, very quickly, is that reason is used widely in gospel spreading. So throughout Acts, and even in my personal experience, I'll get to that later, but I think it says that Paul reasoned in the synagogues like 10 different times in Acts. So the gospel is by no means opposed to reasons. 1 Peter 3:15 very famously says that every believer should be prepared to give an account for the hope that they have, right? And that sounds like apologetics,
Right.
Giving an account for that. In Isaiah 1:18, God says he invites his creatures to come and reason with him. And then in a couple other places, he encourages his creatures to bring a legal case against him. And, legal cases, that's arguments,
Based on
man.
evidence, yeah.
Yeah, that's logic. That's all that. So we shouldn't be scared of this.
Right.
It's definitely approved scripturally.
Is there any more historical points about anti-intellectualism that you have?
Yes. So there is, because this wasn't always how the church functioned, right? I mean, I just said that in Acts, Paul used reason all the time.
Right.
So reason was a staple of the early church. But something happened, right? Something obviously happened. And I would put it back, and people have their opinions about this. I would put it back as far as the Enlightenment and the First Great Awakening, because they were happening around the same time. And in the Enlightenment, it was this focus on free thought without the constraint of any divine, just from basic principles and seeing where you could get with that. And the thing about basic principles, and this is said several times in Scripture, I think in places like 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians, or 1 Corinthians, that like if you have basic principles, you can't get to the gospel. You have to have some revelation. And that's still logic. That's still reasonable to accept revelation, if it is evidenced, right? But you can't get there with just man's wisdom alone. You need to have God giving you something.
Right. Something to start with.
Yeah. And so when they're separated, eventually it's going to lead to non-Christian conclusions. And the other thing that was happening at the same time is at the first and second great awakening, it was focusing on, personal connection with Jesus and emotional, energetic preaching rather than intellectually careful and doctrinally precise preaching. And I mean, personal conversion, like a personal relationship with Jesus, that's super important, right? Again, that's not bad to focus on. But when you focus on it over and above these other things, it is going to create problems,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And that sort of thing made this anti-intellectual state more of a feature
Yeah.
of the revivalism than like a bug.
I think one of the most important things that people take issue with when they're talking about anti-intellectualism, one of the things that scares people the most is probably science.
Yes.
And that's not really addressed much in the Bible as far as you talking about Paul using reason.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot of specific stuff in the Bible about that. And I think that's why a lot of people are afraid of it. And that's another thing that you do see in schools. Obviously, Adventist schools are going to be teaching Adventist doctrine, and that makes sense. But there is a little bit of an undertone of, I don't want to say villainization of mainstream science,
Yeah.
but there's a little bit of
A little bit of villainization.
and that could discourage people from really exploring new options and new knowledge from other people that aren't part of the Adventist community. And there is a man, Francis Collins. He was the head of the Human Genome Project. I don't know why I'm using past tense. He's still alive. But he was the head of the Human Genome Project, which mapped out the entirety of our DNA. He's also involved with the National Institutes of Health. And he wrote a book called The Language of God, which is about his journey from faith, out of faith, into agnosticism, and back to faith through reconstructing what he believed from synthesizing, not Adventism, science and religion. And he got from agnosticism to faith through two things. One, he said that he read Mere Christianity, which is a great book. Both of us have read it, by C.S. Lewis.
Would recommend.
I think it's your favorite author, right? C.S. Lewis?
C.S. Lewis or Dostoevsky.
Yeah.
I don't know. I like them both.
And it just talks about Christianity from a very logical,
Standpoint.
yeah,
It
from a
explains it very
logical
well.
standpoint. And it really helps you understand all of the different arguments, all the different doctrines of Christianity. And then the second thing he did was reconcile science and his faith. And he was willing to look at all of the evidence, all of the knowledge, and just combine it in a way that made him comfortable with what he believed. And this is a good antithesis to anti-intellectualism. He took all the knowledge that was presented to him and he combined it and he just took it all in. He wasn't afraid of it. And then his faith was preserved after that.
Yeah, this drive between this wedge was driven between science and religion is very interesting because that's obviously not always how it was. I mean, the church was like the founder of science, and the reason science started, there's some quote that it's like men began to study the universe because they expected order to be in it, right? They expected it to be intelligible. All the big names of science at the start were all Christian. I mean, like
Right.
Sir Francis Bacon, the inventor of the scientific method, was Christian. Isaac Newton, Gregor Mendel, a lot of these big names had a very strong faith. But there was a wedge after the Enlightenment that was trying to separate religion and science. There was a very influential book published in 1874 called The History of the Conflict Between Religion and Science. And among that and other reasons and other things are happening in like scholastic society, like German higher criticism of the New Testament. So like people trying to just criticize the New Testament and investigate it very rigorously historically. A lot of Christians at the time, and I think this is the result of the first and second Great Awakening and just revivalism in general, they started to treat scholasticism with skepticism, and they like started to not engage it as much.
Hmm.
And I think that, and they weren't really prepared to engage these intellectual blows that were happening at the higher scholastical level. And so they were treated, I think.
Mhm.
And they were treated to all the way, I think, to a point in the 1950s is when it was the worst. I think that's when it really peaked. And I think when high scholasticism was almost entirely agnostic or atheistic. And in the 1960s, Time published an article, I think, called like
God is dead.
God is
Yeah.
Dead or something like that. Yeah, because of how, just gone it was from
Yeah.
most scholarly life.
Yeah.
And that has led to many adverse effects. So sometimes people like think that they can just ignore the opinion of the scholars and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But you can't.
Right.
Because I don't remember who said this, but it's like the ideas that are impassionately discussed one day will be moving armies and countries the next. The time to stop these anti-Christian ideas, it was J. Gresham Machen. The time to stop these ideas is when they are just being impassionately debated. Once it's taken over scholarly society, it's too late. And it's going to drift down into the culture. And I think that's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing a secularizing of the culture.
Yeah.
And praise God that there actually has been a revival in Christian scholasticism in philosophy, actually. There's been a bona fide renaissance of Christian thinking. So I guess I can hope that we'll bounce back in the culture eventually. Probably have to ride the storm for a little bit.
Yep. So I think apologetics is very useful for people who want to reconstruct their faith from the ground up. But as far as attracting more people to faith, how effective do you think it is?
I think it's very effective, but not in the way you might initially suppose. A lot of people don't want or don't consider apologetics because there's this idea no one's brought to Christ by reasoning. You
Right.
can't reason someone into the faith.
Just a feeling. It's just
Yeah. Or a man convinced against his will holds his original position still,
Mhm.
and those sorts of ideas. But I think that's kind of short-sighted. I guess I'll give it my experience with apologetics to show why
Yeah.
it can be super useful in evangelism. I think it's the number one tool that an evangelist should have is apologetics. Well, I mean, love for Christ, obviously,
Right.
number one. But number two, understanding the gospel. Number three, apologetics. Okay, but
Yeah.
it's up there.
It's
You get the
important.
idea. When I was a more inexperienced Christian, I would have opportunities to talk about my faith with other people, just every once in a while.
Yeah.
And I would try and take it sometimes. Most of the time I wouldn't. But sometimes I would take it. And I would do very badly because, they'd ask me a question and I just wouldn't have anything to say about it. And then I'd sort of just have to lay down, an ultimatum, just have faith
Yeah.
or
Just need to believe. Just
or something like that, or
Yeah.
you have to dive in or something like that. But that always left a bad taste in my mouth, because it also wasn't very effective.
right.
Not
People
many
just think
people,
you're crazy.
Not many people
Yeah.
really believe because of the witnessing that I was doing
Yeah.
at the time. But later, once I had a understanding of apologetics, and it's kind of interesting how I got into apologetics. I was having questions of is my faith true? Especially from these encounters I was having with people where they were asking me questions I couldn't answer.
Yeah.
And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to start researching philosophy because that's who deals with this question. Does God exist? And I'm just going to take whatever comes. And that really scared me when I made that resolution that just whatever was true, I was just going to accept it.
Mm-hmm.
I was worried about losing my faith. But I opened YouTube, which is in retrospect is not a good place to start.
Yeah.
Well, it's fine to start, but you definitely shouldn't just stay on YouTube. You should read books. And I watched a debate between William Lane Craig and Christopher Hitchens, and then another one between William Lane Craig and Sam Harris. And I read the comments, and it was like, wow, that was, or like my side won or my side won, and I was like, oh, this is gonna be close,
Yeah.
you know. But then I watched it, and I was like, that wasn't close
Wasn't
at all.
close. Yeah.
I was struck by how strong Christian philosophy and Christian thinking could be. That like it could contend even at this highest level. I definitely wasn't prepared for that. And then after I watched that, I kind of just flung myself into philosophical and apologetical study.
Mm-hmm.
But after I was more experienced, the first thing I found is that I was way more willing to share my faith. You know, it emboldened me more than I could have imagined. So like a guy who just loves like cars or something. Man, I was so willing to talk about Christianity because I knew so much about Christianity. You know, a guy who loves cars, knows a lot about cars, he's going to love talking about cars and he's going to be good at it.
Right.
And he's going to share it confidently because he knows that even if you ask him a question, he's going to be able to answer it because he knows so much about cars.
So not necessarily that with outreach you're going to be starting out with all the philosophical reasons for faith, but it just gives you more confidence to share in the first place.
It gives you way more confidence. But it has another effect in that you can actually answer their questions. And when people have their questions answered, it doesn't force them into faith, but it removes stepping stones that would have kept them from it. So a person who might have otherwise like believed the gospel, but doesn't view it as an intellectually viable option, still won't believe. Like they feel like they don't have permission to believe. You want to remove all of the problems you possibly can to allow a person into the faith.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like how we have, you know, air conditioning in the church. We want to make this something that people would actually do, right? No one would go into a church in Florida
with no
with
AC.
no AC. That would be terrible. You wouldn't preach to anybody,
Yeah.
right? And no one would hear the gospel. When people have anti-Christian beliefs or beliefs that are contrary to Christianity, they can't hear the gospel. You know, they just have a psychological backing against it. You have to remove those first before you can even hope for a hearing of the gospel. And in my experience, my evangelism has been way more successful since I learned apologetics and theology and stuff like that.
What are some of the most common questions that you think people have about faith?
Well, the problem of evil.
Mm-hmm.
The problem of evil is definitely number one. I mean, it's been like that since people were talking about if God existed.
Yeah.
You know, all the way back to Euthyphro and Socrates. People were talking about the problem of evil. But the second one I see a lot is not as a product of the culture. And it's what I think could be called scientism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this idea that only the deliverances of the hard physical sciences can really give us any truth. So that that's strong scientism. Only science can give us truth.
Mm-hmm.
There's also weak scientism that says that science is the best way to truth, though perhaps not the only way to truth. And scientism, it is a product of the culture. You know, all the way back to the Enlightenment with ideas like verificationism. You can only trust what you can verify with your five senses.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is sort of a extension of that.
Right.
And the thing about scientism is that strong scientism is self-refuting. Because the statement, only science can lead you to truth, or only scientifically provable statements can be true, is in itself a scientific statement. You can't prove that with science. That's a philosophical statement about science.
Right.
So it's self-refuting.
So there's a lot of abstract concepts that you can't really relate to science that aren't, you can't deal with it in that way.
And scientism is an abstract concept.
Mm-hmm.
So you have no reason to believe scientism because you can't prove it with science.
Right.
Weak scientism, on the other hand, just isn't a very good philosophical theory because science has philosophical frameworks under it that it needs to run. And these philosophical frameworks, these philosophical beliefs that science needs to work are in question. and are challenged by science.
Hmm.
So then the logic there is sort of like, well, how can the tree be stronger than the roots? You know,
Right.
how can the leaves be more trustworthy than the branches?
Right.
There are also, oh, and an example of one of those things is like that the universe is orderly or the universe is intelligible.
Mm-hmm.
Those are philosophical stances, and they're in question. You know, there are philosophers who seriously challenge them. The other thing is that there definitely are things we know more certainly than we know science. So, one example of this is Rene Descartes' "I think, therefore I am." Your existence is just prior to everything. You know, prior to any experience, you have to have an experiencer. And, you know, that's philosophically challenged, obviously. But, you know, I can know that I exist more than I can know that gravity exists, right?
Yeah.
Because I know gravity exists because, you know, I feel it or I see things drop very consistently. But I know I exist because I
You know.
am in those sentences.
Yeah.
You know, I see. There has to be a me that sees that or the me that feels gravity.
So that's not inherently provable with science. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you can't prove that with
Yeah.
science. I can't prove that I exist with science. It's just intuitive. I know that. You like 2 + 2 = 4. You know, that's another a priori piece of information. And you could say that's scientifically provable. You have two apples, you put them together, you have 4 apples. You can do that 100 times, you're going to get 4 apples, right? But it is a piece of a priori information, so.
Right.
Yeah. Moving on, I've got some questions for you, Leif.
Okay.
Kind of.
Interesting.
I'm going to introduce you to something, and I want to see how you feel about it. Have you noticed a sort of not just anti-intellectualism in the church, but also sort of like in the culture at large? There's a lot less thinking going on, especially amongst like the average person. So
Yeah, I probably do.
yeah, like
Yeah.
people who are just like sort of living without like a sense of direction or like a clear set of beliefs, you know?
Yeah. Not any
There's-
interest in really pursuing anything in specific, just kind of
Just
going
sort of
through life.
Aimlessly meandering,
Yeah.
you know, just seeking out pleasure and avoiding pain and living sort of like that. And what I would ask you is, do you think that this has anything to do with the rising popularity of zombies in pop culture?
You know, I actually had never considered that.
You
Never
that?
considered that, but it could be possible.
I think it's an
Could be
interesting
possible.
allegory because zombies are sort of a representation of like modern man, of like this
Mindless,
non-intellectual,
thoughtless, just-
mindless, thoughtless. Yeah, you know, they're in groups, but there's no community. You know, they're all around each other, but you know, there's no community. Their only focus is to consume. So especially like in America, consumerism, you know, in the West, it's all
Right.
about, you know, what you have and what you can get and money and stuff like that.
Right.
And, you know, zombies obviously don't think. There's no purpose to what they're doing, to why they exist. They're
Just a hollow mind.
yeah, just a hollow
Yeah.
mind. Yeah. So Leif, tell me, how can we avoid a hollow mind? How can we not be zombies?
Intellectualism. Yes.
How do I do that?
You could read,
Read a book.
expose yourself to new ideas,
That's
yeah.
good.
and probably realize that if you just keep consuming things without thinking about what you're consuming, that's just going to lead to unhappiness. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would propose virtues. So, you know, virtues being like character traits, you know, things you're predisposed to doing. And I have 6 virtues here that I think are very good. If you want to develop a Christian mind that honors God, you know, I would suggest cultivating these 6 virtues. And I've kind of touched on some of them already. The first one is wisdom. So this should be a no-brainer, right?
Right.
I mean,
Definitely.
yeah. So what is wisdom, Leif? What is wisdom?
I've always thought as wisdom as like life experience kind of based on what you've gone through. So you are given a situation and you know what the best course of action would be. That's kind of how I've thought of it.
Okay.
As
So
compared to just
it's
book
like-
knowledge.
It's like the application of knowledge.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's what I would say as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it also includes the seeking of knowledge. I think it's Proverbs says like the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, right?
Right.
Yeah. So wisdom, I think, involves a sort of passionate search for the truth, or more of like a surrender to the truth almost. It involves just an accepting of like whatever the truth is, I'm gonna take it. I think that's wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
You know, someone I think it was Kierkegaard said that you need to like in any pursuit of truth there needs to be sort of an undressing of your beliefs. You sort of have to like take it off and just accept whatever is gonna come.
Mm-hmm.
The next virtue is faith. So, like, as you go into this pursuit, you know, have faith in how it's going to turn out.
Right.
So, when you, like, went into apologetics or went into reason or, like, stuff like that, did you have faith that it would turn out the way you hoped it would? That you would still be a Christian by the end of it?
Yeah. And I think that's part of what's good about the culture that we live in is that it's kind of drilled into us that this is what we believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that did help just knowing that
Yeah.
when all is said and done, if I truly believe what I believe, doesn't matter what the new information is. You could trust that it's going to turn out fine.
Yeah, I guess what I was more going for though is that undressing of like your beliefs is kind of scary, right?
Yeah.
But I think if you have faith, you'll be more willing to do it.
Yeah. Yep.
One of the things that like caused me to be a Christian at first is that I thought that I had to pursue the truth no matter what it was, but I was worried that the truth would be bad. You know, that it wouldn't turn out all right. And the only way that the truth that I could be assured that the truth would not be bad is if God existed. Because if a benevolent God existed that, you know, providentially ordered the world,
Mm-hmm.
then I could have faith that whatever truth I found would be good, or at least better than what I had.
Yep.
Right? So, the next one, peace.
Yeah.
You think you could focus on a philosophical treatise in a busy subway?
Probably not. I
Probably
don't think I
not.
could do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's sort of what I'm going for.
Mm.
Is this, you know, not even just peace of mind, but also peace of surroundings.
Mm.
Because if you want to engage in this pursuit of truth and this pursuit of reason, you need some time
To
just
give it your
by
attention.
yourself, without distractions, to just do it.
Yeah.
You know. And that's kind of obvious. I feel like that's the case. I mean, why do we have libraries, right?
Yeah.
That's what they're for. The next one is humility. So have humility about what you actually have reason for believing. You know, intellectual humility.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we want to like go farther than we really can in saying, you know, what we believe, what we have reason to believe,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But we should proportion what we believe to what we have evidence for.
Right.
Yeah. Next one is fortitude. Just stick with it. Keep learning. Yeah.
Yep.
How's that book reading going, Leif?
Pretty good.
Pretty good. isn't it?
Definitely. Definitely.
Definitely. Yeah.
Mhm.
Being very fortuitous, are you?
Yeah.
I'm saying that because Leif takes a little while to read his books.
Yeah.
And I judge him.
I've been on one for about a year. I just started again this week though, so we're fine.
But it's okay. Yeah, it's okay. He's getting there.
Yep.
He's getting there. And you know what? That's better than most people. Most of the zombies, right?
Yep.
The last one is just fidelity to God and his cause. You know, if you want to advance the kingdom of God, then I think it is important to have a Christian mind.
Mm-hmm.
And not everybody needs to know all the philosophy, right? You don't need to know everything. But I think that everybody should be committed to knowing at least some level, especially if you want to evangelize. If you want to evangelize well, you should definitely know a lot.
Right.
All right. Any closing thoughts, Leif?
I just wanted to touch on again what you said about the faith. I think that a lot of people are afraid of learning more, exposing themselves to new information, and combating this anti-intellectualism that we have because they're afraid that it's going to damage
The
or
faith
make
they
them
have.
lose their
Yeah.
faith, right? And that is a fear. But if you really want to strengthen your faith, it's not going to do it by itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think learning more and taking information as it comes is actually the greatest way to test your faith and to strengthen it.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, God doesn't appreciate you, like, pretending
Right,
to act more than you do.
right,
Or, like, your commitment to truth is important to God.
hmm
So God wants you to follow him genuinely,
right.
not to just follow him
Just staying
and
completely in the
ignore
dark,
all the truth. 'Cause
staying in the
he's God
dark
of
your whole
truth.
life, just
Yeah.
not doing anything. That's not
He's the God of truth.
Yeah.
He's the God of life. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, you
Mhm.
know? And so if you're committed to God, I feel like you should be committed to the truth, you know, whatever it is,
wherever it leads.
wherever it leads. Yep.
Mhm.
And you shouldn't worry about it.
Right. So for throughout this podcast, we are going to be taking questions
Yes.
from Sabbath school, from other places, wherever we get questions. If you have questions, just send them in.
Yeah,
And-
you can email them to us at faithisblind@gmail.com.
Yes.
Or faithisn'tblind@gmail.com.
Yeah, faith isn't blind.
Yes. No
And
blind
for this
faith
first episode, we're just going to do one question. It kind of has to do with the theme that we've been talking about today.
Mhm.
How do you break down your faith and reconstruct it stronger?
Well, that's sort of just what we've been talking about, right? You have to have this undressing of your beliefs, this faith that wherever the truth is going to lead is going to be better.
Yeah.
Right? And that, you know, God does exist.
Right.
And, you know, but you also have to have this acceptance that you're just going to follow the truth where it leads.
I think a lot of people, there's a big phase of people who leave the church through something called deconstruction,
Mhm.
where they slowly pick through all their beliefs and find arguments about why it's false so that they could rationalize with themselves why they don't believe it anymore.
Mhm.
Because I think there is a lot of guilt that comes with leaving your faith, leaving something that you thought was so crucial to your salvation. And so many people do that, but I think they're just skipping the second part of not just throwing it all away, but building it back
Mhm.
step by step, block by block, once again, with the faith that it'll all turn out because all the truth should lead to the same place.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're going to do this, don't just look at resources against your faith. You should and you can, but that's not the only resources you should look at. And the second thing that I would recommend is don't just watch YouTube. I met a dude in Spain who said that he had done the same thing that I had done. And I was like, "Oh, what books did you read that led you to that conclusion?" And he was
You
like,
just watched
"Oh, I
YouTube
just watched
videos."
YouTube videos."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh."
They're good, but they're not, can't do
YouTube
everything.
videos are good as introductions to the topics.
Yeah.
Even this podcast, this is an introduction. You should, if you really want to know how faith relates to reason, you should read a book on it.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because that peace that I mentioned before and that fortitude, you need that if you want to get through a book. You don't really need that if you want to get through a YouTube video. You can be doing something else while a YouTube video is just playing in the background, and you can absorb like nothing.
And I think it's a little daunting probably to hear that you should deconstruct and reconstruct your faith and read a lot of books without any specific a specific roadmap, I guess. And throughout this podcast, we're going to be going over different subjects that may help you to do this in a more methodical way. We're going to have an episode about arguments for why God exists, just God in general, not necessarily Jesus or the Christian God, but just evidences of a being behind the universe, an agent. We're going to have an episode about the divinity of Jesus, which
His
is
resurrection.
that's the basics of just Christianity. And then we're going to have an episode about the Bible, about why it is true, why it's holy. There's a lot of arguments against the Bible, apparent contradictions, stuff like that. And then another episode about Adventist beliefs.
In specific.
Yeah.
So we got an apologetical. That's what this podcast is. It's
Right.
going to be apologetics. You know, after this episode and the next episode. Yeah.
Yeah.
So stay tuned for that. We're very happy that you guys have listened and have stayed till the end of the podcast,
Yep.
which is great. We'll see you whenever the next episode releases.
Yes. And remember, faith isn't
Faith
blind.
isn't blind, guys.
Yeah.